Yes, you have hit the top end of YouTube. You are looking at a Wikipedia page scrolling past with some crazy title music in the background. This is Couch Coop Classics. I am Couch Coop. This is episode 1 and we're going to cover Metal Slug. There's been more releases of this game than there has been No Man's Sky updates. It's massive the amount of content they've put out surrounding the brand name. This is the original Neo Geo intro and it's a classic. I remember seeing this as a teenager, looking over someone's shoulder and seeing the graphics on a cabinet at the time. That tank, the idea of having a vehicle, which was very much the selling point of the original game. It was all about the super tank that you sat in and created havoc from. Modern reconceptions of the game have never messed around with the original foundations. This has never been completely overhauled and remastered on a visual level, although there is some modern variants that have a very updated look. The core releases around the Metal Slug brand always had this amazing, distinguishable style.
Heavy machine gun. Blade shot.
I wanted to talk about the pads for the machine. You could get an amazing arcade stick, that beautiful squared graphite grey. Was considered back then extremely expensive objet d'art, but it's the original pad that I'm interested in. It didn't have a directional button on it. It was all about that analog stick, which must have been a bit of a nightmare. I suppose they were looking at that multi-directional firing capability, which was a brand spanking new idea back then, but able to fire diagonally up and down through platforms and just have that freedom. It was like, wow, new world. Talking of the new world, look at the layout of this level and you'll see it a lot. Reminds me of quite a few newer games. This is all PlayStation 5 footage, and this is the aspect ratio stretched to match a widescreen TV, and you'll see the normal ratios coming up with the borders on. I kind of prefer the latter because I'm so used to that arcade cabinet. Why on earth does it do this? Because the game was originally made on squared screens. There was none of that wide panoramic. In order to put it on a normal TV, you'd have to elongate the graphics, and it just doesn't carry too well with me. What on earth is it like couch co-op? Well, it is in short amazing and one of my favourite side-scrolling shooters. It's up there with games like Blazing Chrome that are recent homages that are available on the system, and couch co-op, almost contra clones, but this is kind of where it all was gotten right, and that's why we don't have too many massive facelifts or reiterations of the model on remakes, is because it was all in the right place at the beginning. We're going to be going quite far back with this couch co-op classics series, and this isn't as far back as we can go. Obviously, I'm talking about Atari, Pong, the year dot, but I wanted to talk about this game because it's not going to be in my top 25, and we're moving in to the top 10 territory soon, and I want to make sure this is spoken about for my newest subscribers. It was a couple of years ago that it featured in a 5 more. Briefly, I just spoke about it in passing, so a nice deep dive is well worth it. It controls completely how you'd imagine, and it's got the strangest melee system where if someone's near you and you fire your gun, you'll actually do a melee stab attack move. Mercenary Kings owes about 80% of its look and gameplay model to this game, and they would probably be the first to tell you that. One thing you will notice on speedruns or looking at people who like to take no damage or rescue all the prisoners on levels is that you can kind of bulldoze this. If you're good at knowing where everything's going to appear and be, you can kind of just smash straight through almost non-stop. The speedrunning community for this game is huge and strong and well worth looking at. The bosses and boss fights are well worth talking about as well. It was kind of the first time for me that I'd played a decent side-scrolling run and gunner that locked me into an arena and gave me a boss that had multiple attack patterns and even forms. And the beauty of all of the different plates of metal or the slow destruction of a boss in front of you is amazing, and that's probably going to get to the title of the video. Is this is kind of a celebration of this game's looks. I feel back then that lack of power and tools and things to use to create good looking video games, they were like starved of decent tech. They just had to use what they got, pushed them to produce absolute labours of love with all the animations and colours and boss designs as well. This game's got the most outlandish bosses and vehicles. At one point you control a giant mech with diggers for hands and you whack planes out of the sky. I shit you not, it takes the whole screen up.
Thank you.
Why on earth don't you show us that then, Coop? Because this is my next point. This game is ridiculously hard. On single player and co-op, it doesn't let up. It doesn't actually change when you go couch co-op, so things can be a little bit easier on early levels. But it is bullet hell. You've got to be jumping around like a lunatic, and getting used to the whole pace of it can be very daunting. It's not one for grandma, obviously, and it may not be one for the youngers because A, the gore, and B, it's just relentless on you. It was a different era when they made games like this. They weren't making them to make sure that you didn't get triggered or have any PTSD after playing. They didn't give a damn. They wanted to make these things as hard as hell, and this one is bang on. One thing that hasn't aged too well, if you've got like a partner or no headphones, is the racket of the whole thing. That gun in the options you can put as auto fire, so that gives you an idea of it just doesn't need to stop, and it doesn't stop. How smart actually deploy a similar thing with stuff like Next Macamel or Rezo Gun. Constantly firing is kind of the way forward. The version that we're looking at now is Metal Slug XX, and it is available on the PlayStation Store, and of course it is only 2-player couch co-op, but it's so worth a visit. It's available on the PlayStation 4 and it's been on just about every system on the planet. I have been Couch Coop. Stay tuned. I've got a trailer coming up for a new horror series. Don't watch if you're squeamish. It's episode 2 of Couch Co-op Classics. I am Couch Coop. We're looking at Snow Bros. Huge nostalgia for me. Came out in 1990. I was a very young boy and I had to go on holiday, right, get this, to France. I was ripped away from my Spectrum 128K and just in this French village with like nothing to do, but there was an arcade cabinet in the corner under the name of Snow Brothers or Snow Bros, and it had 2 joysticks, and I had my stepbrother with me. Anyway, we couldn't leave until we finished that first boss, and many a French franc was lost. As far as I was concerned, France was amazing from that day on. We're going to look at most of the ports. We're starting off with the actual arcade cabinet capture, so this is why that music sounds a bit tinny. The visuals will look a little bit different to some of the 16-bit, and there's a current version of this game which we'll get to at the end. This is part of what I consider the Holy Trinity Tower, okay? You guys know what I'm talking about. And we will get to those other games at some point. It's all about going up floors. And there's like 50 advertised in the original base game. By the way, some of the box art for this is shockingly bad. It was that sweet spot. Mega Man fell into that, where box art was just hit or miss. The developer's called Toplan, and they didn't make the other 2 Trinity games, and they've had this strange rocky ride after Snow Bros came out. Snow Bros was sequeled with the 2nd and 3rd, but some of these games on what they released after Snow Brothers are just not as bigger names over in the West as this title was. I was really surprised at that. Snow Bros was released and distributed in North America under a Capcom umbrella to a certain extent. I was under the impression that Capcom both developed and distributed this game full stop, but no, barely neither. And Ocean as well were also involved in some of the European porting of this game. This is the intro to the Genesis or Mega Drive version of the game. Really stunning stuff. I love this art style, and there was more put in to the front end of the story once it made it off the arcade machines. It's actually suspiciously close to the Cuphead story with 2 brothers, normal humans, I think, normal human boys, and then are like cursed with these forms of being these Snow Bros. The game's creature design and art style is very Eastern, and it was a real alien look for me as a young guy. I hadn't seen this sort of fonts or these strange wavy lines. I was really taken aback at the enemy designs as well. They were proper creepy to me with their larger noses, kind of goblin style. It hadn't occurred to me that we're looking at a thoroughbred Japanese game. As an adult who's familiar with a lot of these images, it all makes perfect sense to me now, and the detail was phenomenal. Smoked deal, bit of maki sushi there, and I remember seeing this front banner and thinking, what is this sush? I didn't see the eye. I'm like, what is this sush? But look at how cool the food angle is with the artwork. Sushi had not hit the West in 1990, especially not England, into the life of a 10-year-old boy. And that probably goes for all the adults as well. This imagery was very unfamiliar. Okay, it's time to talk about gameplay, and you've probably been working it out in the background here, but there are a few nuances that make it quite an exciting setup. One of which is the enemies will come back to life if you haven't put enough snow on them. They will even reanimate if they're completely covered in snow. So the whole situation's got time bombs ticking all over it. The higher you get in the room, the more damage you can cause by pushing down your snowball and smashing everything. You can also ride the snowball, and you can work in conjunction with each other by getting special blue balls. It doesn't let up either. Very difficult. You've got to be moving and looking for gaps. It's a very intense game. We're just going to look at the sequel very quickly, and this is the weirdest character select menu, right? I think that's a real picture of a baby that's being redrawn in a 16-bit style. I never played the second game. It boasts 4-player. I'm looking into actually trying to emulate it or get my hands on it. I don't remember the game having a huge impact on the industry or being owned by myself, but it looks kind of awesome. They haven't messed around with too much. The third game changes it into footballs, I think, and it does not carry over well. They've got loads of really weird voice sampling in it. It's lost that beautiful cartoony arcade charm. This one is probably where it ends for the series, I think. Finally, we get to the Switch version of the game, which is a revamped, remade version of the original. Extremely welcome. I'm currently waiting for my physical copy, and this can do no wrong in my eyes. It's still got local co-op on it, and it's had a real sharpen of all of the visuals. Extremely important they didn't delve or mess around, put microtransactions and change it into a battle royale. You know what I'm talking about. Everything's kept in the right place, so well done Nintendo for rolling that out. Not extortionate either, retailing around 25 quid, but you can find a free download on PC of the 1993 release of the game, which still works on a couch co-op level. You can use the keyboard, you don't even need 2 pads, it doesn't cost anything. It's a great emulated version of the game. I may even dig out a link and whack that in the old comments. Can you comment also on what your classic couch co-op memory was? Do you have a deeper personal connection with Snow Bros like I do, or maybe it's the other Holy Tower Trinity games that you're more into? I'm going to look at some Bitmap Brother games on the next video, and Metal Slug XX was covered on the original episode 1 of the series. The sooner some drill rappers cover that, right, on SoundCloud or whatever, that's going to be amazing. It's only a matter of time. I'm Couch Coop, and we got a nice nostalgic one for you today. It's from 1990, same year as Snow Brothers, surprisingly, for the UK release. It is Speedball 2 from the Bitmap Brothers. I never played the first game. This is kind of a Street Fighter 2 situation where the first game was a nothing burger. The sequel came out, rocked the whole goddamn gaming world. I do go on record as this being one of the only sports games you have ever or will see me play. There's 2, actually, and the other one will be coming up on the nostalgia list, so little hint there, it was a Sega Genesis exclusive for UK release. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Let's look at some cover art, because this one is very special. The artist, Glenn Fabry, could be one of my favourite cover artists for that genre of game for that decade. He did a few, and he worked with Bitmap Brothers for a while. His style is so distinctive, absolutely beautiful. This is probably one of my most nostalgic covers also. The motion in the image, the hand, and just tiny things in that cover just drew me as a kid straight to it. I had the Amiga version, but there were console releases, and it did look slightly better over on the 16-bit machines, and you also had the pad. I had to use the Python 1. Alright, the sound of all 4 of them suckers coming off a book because you've got too into it and your mum going, that's it, turn it off, you've had enough. They are strangely pleasant memories. That brings me on to the soundtrack and Bitmap Brothers themselves. Now I am going to do more Bitmap content, but I wanted to talk about their prowess in the industry at the time. They were releasing games that had like top 10 songs featuring in them. Bomb the Bass was involved. Some of that Xenon cover art was just amazing. It's so weird how the industry has changed since then. You would just never hear of a new release with a tune coming out with the launch of a video game. Let's talk about just what the hell this game actually is. And it's a bit like a five-a-side football, but you're in a contained arena. The ball never leaves pitch. This was one of the major selling points for me when I first played it, was I got used to sensible soccer because there was nothing else to play on that level. And when I saw this running, the fact that it just doesn't stop, there's replays, there's slowdowns, there's injuries, it's all metal, they dance and celebrate afterwards in a little window in the corner. It was mind-blowing for me. I was like, holy shit, this is RoboCop meets Gladiators. It was its deliberate encouragement for violence that really pulled everyone else in as well, I think. There was none of this, wasn't a foul. Your job was to deck the other player down and keep hold of the ball. It was like a timed tap on the tackle. Now that brings me on to its ridiculously tight metagame, involving each character being leveled up on stats with money that you earn on wins. And you had to go to a market, there would sometimes be players available, and all of them were named after popular British football players of the time. Gaz has even got a mention in this, so that was really cool to see its Britishness trickle through into the actual campaign structure. It was also my first experience with that sort of football manager model, and I know that's a huge area of gaming now, but it was the first time I'd ever clapped eyes on it or see it have an impact on pitch. With football manager games, you kind of sit back and watch the results. With this, if you powered up your forward, you would then be controlling a really well powered up forward. That reward circle never got boring for me because I always wanted to win, get more money, see who's on the market to put into my team to take to the next campaign match. It was a very, very solid single player experience.
Ice cream!
That brings me over to the couch co-op. Kind of the meta back-end material was locked. Understandably, you couldn't just march in with an all-star team against someone with nothing. But when it came to actual versus games, it was all about using what was on pitch. There's certain items that can make the ball knock another player down if they receive it. There's also points to be had on pitch that don't necessarily revolve around goals. So it's your job to pick up all these little things. There's even armor available. It was crazy. It worked so well in versus. There was hundreds of hours here because of the variables being found within the game itself, not necessarily about the stats of your team before you went out. There was also a callous method of going for a particular player, getting them injured and off pitch and them not being in the game. Furthermore, whenever a player grabbed the ball, their energy would appear at the bottom of the screen and you could really target someone and completely remove the other team's star player. So other than throwing the ball at the goal, you're running around trying to collect items, you're looking to power up your goal score, and then you're trying to get someone injured so they're taken permanently out of the game. It's so good. Remakes and sequels. There is an HD remake, which is one of the more intact versions of the game. They've put a slight twist on the way the ball's thrown, so the flow of it all becomes a bit strange. You used to be able to rely on players being exactly where they were supposed to be, and firing diagonally would mean that you guaranteed a land on somebody. With this, it really disrupts things, but I do love its look, and it's great to have this given a nice modern lick of paint and not ruin too much of that precious base level meta game. This is a PlayStation 1 remake called Speedball 2100, and as you can see, a lot of that heritage has been lost. It's kind of a worse looking game. Don't quite know how they've managed that on a newer system.
Get ready!
There's actually quite a lot of Speedball misses out there in history where they have tried to recreate that original bit of magic, and as you can all tell, it's just never been recreated on such a mammoth level. We are still in the 90s, and that's not a reference to my dress sense. This is about the Bitmap Brothers and the Chaos Engine. Last week we had the delectable Speedball 2, and the music connoisseurs among you will notice a similar vein in quality with the sound production. This game is an absolute stunner, and it did some things so ahead of its time that some games are still catching up now. I want to talk about this intro because it's lengthy and it changed depending on what system you were viewing the game on. What it did was list all of the playable characters. Now that brings me over to the box art. The box art for this particular game is the drabbest, I think, of their whole series, but what they were concentrating on is the role-playing idea of taking on these different characters, so they plastered them right on the front of the box. I do love the black flushness of it all. Even the cartridge was nice and flush and black and dark looking, so they went in the right direction there with a theme. Now, one of the aesthetic themes is Victorian steampunk. Remember, we're in 1992. You ask a millennium about where steampunk came from, they'll probably tell you that Hassan Piker invented it. So all these new ideas are flooding into my boy-sized head, and the idea of being able to control and roleplay as a particular character who has unique stats and maybe different weapons, and I loved the caricature pictures of them all. They all looked dark and brooding, and there was a brilliant little description. Little did we know that they vary slightly different from each other. There are cool weapons to be had with each unique character, but as far as move speed and anything else goes, slots or stuff like that, no, it was basic stuff. But this is, for me, where it started. I'm talking about the character-based action role-playing game, and the top-down shooter genre was kind of born here for me. Another thing that we take for granted a little bit now is that a AAA game from a leading studio, and it was kind of their peak, I think. Bitmap didn't really get much higher than this with numbers and with popularity. It wasn't downhill after this game, but this was their peak area. But my point being, of course it was going to be couch co-op. Yeah, why wouldn't it be? That was the way forward for loads of these games, mainly because the internet wasn't around, and the more people they could rope into a gaming session, the better. But it was just so cool. Everybody knew that this was going to be an absolute couch co-op hit, just looking at the box. Just back to that console, because I was blabbering when it was on screen. This shows the difference in stats on the character. See that blue and green bar adjusting there? I mean, to my original comment, it wasn't mammoth. There were differences, but to us as kids, this was like a colossal game mechanic. They even put these like really deep backstory text against them, which had no inclination whatsoever on anything that happened in game. Did you get a different ending depending on what character you played as? I'm 90% sure that's a no. Everyone got the same damned ending. But to my point, this was step one to playing as a prefabricated character with a backstory that had different weapons to whatever else you chose. It was a variety in a video game that I hadn't come across before. I want to talk about its controls, because if you're watching, you'll realise that you can only fire in the direction you were facing. This is a twin stick that you had to play on one stick. It worked. We didn't know any better, and of course if you wanted to retreat and fire, you had to retreat, turn around, fire, retreat, a bit like playing StarCraft. Robotron had been out. The idea of facing one way and shooting another wasn't completely fresh, but it just didn't get implemented into this game, mainly because you didn't have two crosshairs or two sticks, so it just would have been a bloomin' nightmare. I was of course on my trusty Python 1, which also had an auto fire option. I'm pretty sure that was implemented with this. It didn't have hold down and keep firing as an option.
Layer saved. Node activated.
Back to that character differential, they did have different specials. You can see the icons down on the UI at the bottom of the screen there. The priest had health, I think, to be given to himself or another player, and one of them had like a demolition explosive. So it was synergizing. There was that step there early doors, and it was very cool to pick two people that complemented each other. Other than the finale fight, there are no real boss fights involving like big lumberous creatures or like a unique enemy. There was a lot of arena style, trapped in an area, do a wave system, or there was a lot of puzzles involving a damn key and doors. That nearly broke me. I seem to remember backtracking and just getting lost in these labyrinth style levels. Let's get to versions, and we're looking at the Amiga 500. This was the original copy of the game that I purchased and bought and played. We did see a very good edition on the Mega Drive, which actually had a better system of UI. It was semi-see-through. Also, a slightly richer colour palette, but not a richer sound.
Layers activated.
There was this Amiga CD32 edition of the game, which in my eyes is one of the best looking versions of it. Nice high frame rate, you've got that depth in colour, and you've got some pretty cool resolution. It was quite a powerful system anyway, and it could be bolted onto your standard Amiga. It was kind of like an upgrade, a bit like the Sega CD. So this was definitely the best place to play the Chaos engine. We had a sequel come out in 1996. This was when Bitmap was sort of sailing into some dangerous seas. We only see one official title from the studio after this called Z, which is not a very memorable piece of programming, but holy crap, look at this. It's split screen autonomous. This is amazing, and look at the artwork on the actual sprites themselves. It's got a Zelda kind of theme to it, and it is really quite impressive with a lot of its ideas. The enemies aren't too worrying, and it doesn't look like they've sucked up much of that steampunk Victorian idea, but to have a full-blown split-screen top-down like this was so welcome, and I cannot believe I didn't play it. So it was 3 years later, 1996, and I can straight up see quite a lot of repeat assets from the original game. And if you were to take that split out and look at it with a sort of fresh pair of eyes, there's not really that much difference, but there wasn't an evolution in systems either. You're still using the same amount of CPU. I'm not too sure how long I could put up with that soundtrack for. It's certainly a jump from the original soundtrack on the Chaos Engine 1, and of course Renegade were involved on that front. Betty Boo, Magic Pockets, those guys knew how to make a good sounding game. Okay, I think that might be your lot. I have been Couch Coop. This was Couch Coop Classics. I'm going to build a playlist. I want to get to 6 videos, otherwise that looks weird on the homepage, but links to the other games. I've done Metal Slug, we've done Snow Brothers, and of course we had a look at the amazing Speedball 2 last week. We're going to 2004, 2005 this week. Do you remember when EA Games had that logo? When they had some integrity? Not funny. Criterion, Guildford, England studio, had their heyday in the noughties, as far as I'm concerned, when it came to couch, co-op and split screen. They gave us the Burnout series, but particularly they gave us Burnout 3 and Burnout Revenge. We're going to look at both of them. This could have been my first example of having to buy 2 games twice, because it came out on the Xbox 360. So Burnout 3 stayed over on the PlayStation 2, then we had Revenge released on the PlayStation 2, and then we had an Xbox 360 version of Revenge, which was seriously boosted. We're going to look at it later. What was Burnout? Well, it was an arcade racer that kind of prided itself on having some very state-of-the-art destruction mechanics. So it always wanted you to smash something, hit something. They loved these sparks and high-moving, high-intensity furniture going past you. It was one of the best-looking drive-in arcade games available on the market. This thing beat Ridge Racer, Sega Rally. It was a whole new level. Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec was out at the time, and it boasted no destruction mechanics whatsoever. So this came along and blew everyone quite literally out of their chairs. It was also that brilliant pre-internet time where couch co-op and split screen was a must with your racing game. So the Gran Turismo A-Spec version had a flawless full screen, amazing split screen, not that terrible aspect ratio we see nowadays. A very different time, let's say. Why have you shrunk the screen like this? Well, it's helping me, because when you expand or blow up the image, it just looks so damn terrible. These games were great, but the motion blur on them, the smudging, really doesn't do them any justice. So I'm trying to minimize it by pushing it into a smaller space possible to not spread that graphical infidelity. Also trying to avoid a bollocking from the people I stole the footage of. What we've got playing here is Burnout 3 Takedown. That's its official title. But as you can see, the game doesn't just revolve around getting over a finish line first. It leans towards causing damage and getting numbers, and some game modes allowed you to just go head to head with each other and smash up as much stuff as physically possible. It was amazing. Sometimes it was turn-based. We're going to look at it in a bit more detail in a sec, but it was a crash mode that really made history. They even released an iOS standalone version of it. Playing the race mode, getting around a track, was quite literally eye-bleeding. You had to go into this trance, and it was even worse if you had the screen split, but it just about worked. It was the most excitement we'd had on those machines. Blasting around those tracks at that speed and enjoying a really cool cutscene if you smashed into your mate. That was what the subtitle takedown was all about, that you got this awesome like free cam of your mate smashing off course, and then it would just whip straight back on, and you'd really get disorientated if you weren't used to the pace of this game. It was unbelievable, and there's not really been anything like it since. This is Burnout revenge footage on the Xbox 360. You can straight up see the improvement, and it came with some quite innovative modes also. They didn't ditch the crash mode, which was very important, and it was kind of a mainstay for me and friends because it offered this turn-based system that up to 4 people could play and just take turns in causing as much damage on a particular piece of intersection. The noise of oncoming traffic zipping past you was something we hadn't really heard with that much intensity before. We had a little bit on games like GTA, but this really pushed the envelope. Going against oncoming traffic and having that near-miss accolade come up really got the adrenaline going, especially if you're doing it against somebody else who's further down the course than you. And that was really kind of the joy of the game. Although it was an arcade racer and you did have some unbelievably favourable drift mechanics in it, you could stack on some corners and you would instantly know if your opponent had done it because in your peripheral vision you can see their car tumbling in a burning mass. So that would give you more gumption to get going because you know you're going to close that gap. Some of the one-player content came with some really cool events and challenges in it, and some amazing cars that mimicked a lot of big-name brands. There was no actual licensed vehicles in, and they kept that going with Paradise. I really respect that. Rockstar do it really well. It's so cool to see like innovative car models that technically don't exist. In hindsight, the noise of the game is absolutely crazy, and having it on high volume with a bunch of lads and just the screaming and the tyres, the engines, any next door neighbour is going to be banging on that door. That was half the fun at 25, I suppose. I know this sounds cliche, but you don't hear or see games that are this raw, intense, and just basically a physical accostation on all of the senses. I've probably got long-term retina damage from way too many hours of this game. Anyway, crash mode, check this out. The angle was to cause a massive pile-up. With as many cars as close to you as possible, you then detonated your car and caused huge numbers on damage. And then the next person would go and compete with your number. There'd be a huge finale, and it would all work so well as a tense, turn-based destruction crash game. Why was split screen taken out of the Burnout series? Well, same reason a lot of modes were taken out when the internet was rolled out in gaming. They came out with Paradise, it was always online, there were more people involved, and to tell you the truth, it was a phenomenal game. One of the few two relics of this genre that have kept their split screens are COD, bless it, and of course Gran Turismo, if you can call it a split screen, but we're moving into an area where it's very unfrequent in a AAA release. That's why I'm all over games like Hot Shot Racer and Grip, Horizon Turbo Chase with like 4-screen split. It's really amazing, but you have to go to that AA indie game sphere to get that fix, links and annotations. I am Couch Cooper and welcome to Couch Coop Classics. We're going to be looking at Spy vs Spy. It's kind of the series, but we're going to look at the original games. They're the ones that interest me the most. And we had one on the Spectrum ZX from 1984. This is the one we're looking at now. Now this is possibly my first PvP experience ever on a computer, so it's a very important game for me. But I was a very young lad, didn't really quite understand what was going on. It was only in hindsight that I looked at the game in more detail and realised that it does pull some amazing stuff really early in the industry. Put together by a guy called Mike Rydell, who went on to make some chess games. He was sort of a pioneer with voice sounds in video games. This hasn't got any groundbreaking sounds in it. It was quite a mundane soundtrack, but we also had some iconic noises and explosions associated with the entire series that actually came together in the original. And unfortunately, it's not the same talking chess game that's in the thing that McReady pours his hot bear into. So what is it? What is the game all about? Well, you heard me mention PvP earlier. Now this is like a strategy slash treasure hunt slash race. And as the name suggests, you're both spies versus each other in a contained map. Now this is the crazy thing. This was 1984 on a ZX Spectrum. You had 128K to work with on a good day. Now this thing had its own shared map and different routes, like a tiling system that allowed you to see who's been in what, but not who has been in the objects and furniture within each tile, within each room, essentially. Now this is where it gets crazy. You get the chance to go up to things and interact with them, and you have all of these different traps and gadgets. One of them being a spring, there might be a bomb. The objective of the game is to search for pieces that put together a plane to get off wherever you are, but you're also laying in traps on the objects that you've been through. So this is like a trail behind you. And if both trails interact with each other, someone's going to die because you open a desk drawer that's got a spring-loaded bomb in it, or you fall into an acid bucket. There's some really mad stuff going on, and then you can counter the traps. But Coop, you're doing all this in front of the other person. They just need to look down and see what you're doing. Well, there's the other clever layer. Not only are the rooms represented in different colours, so your periphery vision knows that someone's in the green room that you may have just gone in, but the prompts to lay in the traps are not visible to the other player. They're on your pad or keyboard, so they have no idea what you're up to. It was absolute genius because you end up in a like poker face situation where you know they're heading towards something that you've set up, and you can't look excited or eager because they'll clock that you've put a bomb in the bottom of that chest of drawers. It's game design genius, and the map reflects it as well, giving loads of dead ends at really cool angles for you to start playing around. Talking of playing around, it was the first ever game I ever had seen that had variables before you started. Like you can decide your map size, different items, difficulty. It was very clever. Now moving on to the following year, because we actually saw a re-edition, the Island Caper. It came out on the C64, which is a slightly more powerful machine. So this added more items, a more detailed environment. The traps, locations, and combinations of increases as well are something I didn't mention about the base game, that you had to combine sometimes traps with certain items. There would be this like sweet spot with certain things that you put together that would result in huge impact on the other player's game. A slightly improved soundtrack, not a massive jump in the quality, but definitely a lot more colour and detail on the island itself. I remember seeing that volcano and just thinking, I'm in the new age of graphics and the autonomy, the stuff that you can get up to. It's two separate games. This is split screen design perfection, really, and it's well ahead of its time. We need to drum out something in this vein again, because what they came up with back in 1984 was a game model that really does still stand strong today. The objective of this one was to get to your submarine, and it had one of the more tongue-in-cheek endings of all Spy vs. Spy games. And of course you might be wondering why don't they look like plague doctors. It's a Cuban artist. It's a magazine called Mad, which was around in the early 80s. Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cold War, spies, dynamite, and people getting stabbed with spiked umbrellas was totally a thing back then. The third installation that I actually played of the game was Arctic Antics, which wasn't 87, so it wasn't too much of a roll forward on technology. We still had the same system we saw on the 664. Slight nuances added, a little bit more with the environment. You had penguins in this one, and you had a massive actual missile that was going to go off from the Arctic. I mean, you couldn't get more closer to the truth politically at the time. I'm trying to think of the most memorable thing that stood out on this particular installation, and it was the fact that they got rid of the sort of recognizable screen backgrounds, so that everything was white, everything had this cliff in the background, so you were really stuck about that peripheral recognition to what the other player was up to or where they were. That did ramp up the tension a little bit more. This one was also a lot bigger, with a lot more tasks to gather and get in order to actually put that missile together. I think you might have even had a headquarters in the form of an igloo. It was leaning towards that sort of hub system where you had to get everything back to a center point to get that missile going off. And look at this, Metal Gear Solid 2 just stole that scene completely. Of course, we had a 90s 360 version, got rid of the split screen, turned it into a third person, even added crafting. It was kind of at the birth of the internet age with online gaming, so it came with some online multiplayer to sort of push that competitor level, but massive missed opportunity. Could have been a split screen of versus, you could still have that secret button input. Wow, a ball drop there. Don't need to get me started on the great split screen swindle, links and annotations.
Ed!
Turns out it's not too impressive if you blurt out the name of a video game when it appears in a film or series. Based featured Time Splitters and Resident Evil, and Shaun of the Dead didn't actually feature an on-screen version of Time Splitters. I am Couch Coop, by the way, but we all know it was there, and we all know Peg's a big PS2 fan. Time Splitters came in three forms: Time Splitters 2, and Time Splitters Future Perfect. This video is really going to be about Time Splitters 2. That's where all my pleasant memories are, and that's where the split screen really came into its own. We're looking at a Neo Tokyo level, rain, reflection, neons. It's 2002, and Time Splitters 2 was well ahead of its time. I haven't even touched on the soundtrack. I can think of so many games that haven't done a cyberpunk city or introduction half as good as this now in modern day gaming. You've got to look at Mirror's Edge and some of my cyberpunk material. I have produced videos about games that aren't Cyberpunk 2077. Well worth the look. We need to talk about Free Radical, the studio. Time Splitters 1 was kind of built as a spiritual successor to Iredi GoldenEye. Yeah, loads of the developers came out of that studio, started their own, pumped this series out under Idios and EA, and the whole thing was a massive success story. We'll get to Haze in a minute. So we've got some absolutely industry-leading talent on team, and we've got some very good new ideas, and of course the whole thing is geared up around split screen, both PvP and co-op. This is the strength of the series, particularly with Time Splitters 2 and Future Perfect. The campaigns were really good, they were very strong. This particular level is one of the strongest of Time Splitters 2, but that train scene, some of the opening single-player content was also extremely memorable. What you're seeing here has rarely been equalled on a couch co-op campaign level since 2002 and this series. We're sneaking around, we're avoiding cyber police, you can see the sirens, there's vision cones, one of us had a gun at the start, the other one didn't, there had to be cameras taken out. It was like a step-by-step process, constant communication, excellent level design, and really groundbreaking visuals for the time. The way that the weapon is pitched on screen is very GoldenEye, and some of the animations and sort of the blockiness of characters themselves was a subject of graphical fidelity at the time, but B, also something that blatantly is carried over from the GoldenEye series. Some of them grabbing their wound spots or having detailed animations on death was totally a new thing for us. Also, remember that GoldenEye was a Nintendo 64 exclusive, and that was a very expensive machine at the time. One thing that's miffed me about Nintendo a little bit is they used to come out with these mammoth, powerful machines every so often that would just directly compete with any other powerful system on the market. The Cube was the last time we saw that, but the 64 was a big machine, both on price tag and performance. Let's get back to the game's other attractive aspects, and this might be something that some of you may have forgotten, but it came with a map editor that we're going to get to in a second. But you could also play with like prefabricated builds as characters and on maps, both on a local co-op and one-on-one PvP, but also be teamed up against AI bots that you could control the numbers of and actually build the map from scratch. This is the editor section I wanted to talk about. Colossal. I couldn't believe how much freedom they gave us. Doom does it a little bit nowadays, and we used to see a lot more of it in the COD games. But one thing I will say now is that video games are locked in this respect. We don't get given the freedom and creative inspiration. The developers just say, look, here are all the assets, here's all the stuff. Why don't you guys come up with your own ideas? We saw it with Tony Hawk. A lot of this is going, and it annoys me because 90% of the fun with that Time Splitters 2 was creating a crazy level and then stuffing it full of reindeer Mr. Underwoods. To be fair, Halo is still clinging on to that Forge and its map editor aspects, but they stripped the whole franchise of split screen, so it's like 2 of one, half a dozen of the other. It doesn't really matter if you haven't got that local co-op aspect in the first place, 343. And I've put a video about the decline of split screen, especially with the Halo series Splinter Cell. That's exactly what this map and this mission was. It's the first mission of Time Splitters 2 in the main game itself, and it was amazing. It was like having a Far Cry game on 2 screens. You had to communicate, take out the cameras. A lot of the enemies had personalities. They would make noises. You could shoot them through windows. There was stealth. It was excellent and it was huge. The game was also damn difficult with having strict vision cones and like one chance only not to be seen. I replayed that Neo Tokyo level a lot, and this on hard with a mate was like clockwork. You had to be point to point, minute to minute, very fast and clean out the whole base before you were spotted. It was great game design. The third installation for me seems to be one of the more misty on memory, and there is a thing called Time Splitters Rewind, which I confess I don't know much about, but it seems to be like a 2021 remake. Whether it came to fruition or not, I'm not sure, but that would be something interesting. And I think you can also access this on Xbox Arcade still, on a backwards compatible subscription. Again, don't quote me. Get this, that terrible Homefront Revolution game came with a copy of Time Splitters 2 that worked on the PlayStation 4. That is definitely confirmed. Now let's talk about what happened to Free Radical. Because the Time Splitters trilogy sold so damn well, Sony sort of took them on board and made them develop an exclusive PlayStation 3 game called Haze. I know, alarm bells are starting already. They're making them commit. It's a system exclusive and it's a new IP. Yeah, it flopped hard. It was billed as Sony's Halo killer and it just didn't do anything. It was a terrible first-person shooter, and I went with an Xbox 360 by the grace of God, because that was what I call my dark years, my step away from the Sony franchise with the console. I didn't own the PlayStation 3, but that wasn't a huge loss. First kill! Before we talk about Alien Breed or the Alien Breed series, we've got to talk about Alien Syndrome. 1987. It was a big game for me because I owned a ZX Spectrum and it was relatively older on the system by the time I'd got to it. This is Commodore 64 footage, and you might be thinking, why have you picked this out? Well, this is kind of about Aliens plagiarism, the 20th Century Fox franchise I'm referring to. Some of the front covers for Alien Syndrome were crazy close to lawsuits. It also features in the Snow Bros bracket for having one of the worst UK front covers ever released on record, full stop. Mega Man 1, you've been rivaled. This was also couch co-op and 2-player. All of these games were. Let's have a quick look at the jump-in Spectrum graphics. Back when a jump-in system actually meant something. Oh, Coops on one tonight. Okay, let's get to the main show, and here we have it. A beautiful top-down. Now, twin stick is a bit of a generous word because the game had a very linear firing arc. Diagonals were in there, but it was a singular firing system, i.e. you had to be facing the way you wanted to fire, so you couldn't retreat and face the aliens. You had to stop and turn around. Chaos Engine had this. It was a sign of the times. It was very early for inception of this sort of game. This is very much the Gauntlet model, but it was wrapped in a beautiful HR Giga. Aliens had just come out, so the hype was everywhere.
Welcome to Fintech Systems.
It also featured real voice sampling. Even though she sounds like she might have an impediment, was a huge thing for a game back then. Team 17 were kind of AAA game studio and distributors way back in the 90s. They now specialise on quite good indie games, and they didn't walk away from this series either. We'll look at some of the modern fruitions towards the end. This gun was excellent. It was even lifted from a side-scroller that they produced called Project X. So some of these assets are reused, but it was well out of canon to have a massive blue laser gun.
Warning. Destruction imminent.
What isn't out of canon though is the way that all the aliens look. It was really recognisable from the films. Not too much hive material, but definitely that sci-fi corridor setup. And you even see the actual ship in the hangar at the start of Aliens appears in level 1 of this game. So we were just hopping up and down with the fact that we were playing an Aliens game. Even got the sphincter ducts opening there. Big fan of those in Alien Isolation, if you remember. We get to see some facehugger action here with brilliant, efficient use of pixel design. They look incredible. Scuttly, scared the hell out of us, quite difficult to shoot. Where were the lawyers? Why did they not pull this up and start getting out the legal paperwork? Where is the couch co-op footage? Couch coop? Well, the thing is I couldn't find any decent stuff, and I had to actually dive into Wiki and try and remind myself that this was a 2-player local co-op game. You do have the stats for player 2 down at the bottom, and incidentally we've made the switch to the follow-up, which was called The Horror Continues, and a great looking game also. We didn't get to the box art, and I was instantly starry-eyed at seeing that awesome canine jet black shiny box on the shelf, and then we had the follow-up, which was even more scary and Geiger-esque, I feel, with the imagery of the alien. The sequel was blatantly better looking and a lot more busy and came with some really amazing gun variety and alien variety as well. They sort of came out of the ground, you couldn't really see what was coming round corners. It was much more panic inducing. That was a cool thing about the 2-player, is that aliens would come from one side, you'd have to look after certain entrances. Insert sphincter joke here. There was that communication, someone had to go and fetch keys, you had to get into secret rooms and areas. It was definitely a first for that local co-op experience. Back to the point about what Team 17 are doing now with the series. The games, I think there's about 9 of them, and there's 2 main eras. The retro, old school Commodore 64 Amiga material, then on to almost current gen. It goes up to PlayStation 3. There might have even been a Windows or Xbox 360 Microsoft fruition of one of these modern sequels. We're going to look at some of the gameplay in a second. But it's really cool to see that Team 17 are around still. They might be one of the oldest developers that are still pushing out pretty good stuff on all systems.
Ensign Vance at your service? This man claims his name is Thaddeus Barnes, though I can't vouch for him.
So this is a trailer for Alien Breed Impact. Now if you know these videos, I kind of always round off with a bit of bitterness about how terrible the modern versions of really cool retro couch co-op games have been. Speedball 2 is a hell of an example of that. So I was like, whoa, I didn't have a PlayStation 3. This was released on it, and I found some gameplay on YouTube, and yeah, I maybe need to put my hand in my pocket and have a look at this one.
That sounds really healthy. Let's see about that.
Not local co-op, but on Steam, online multiplayer. I was also recommended a game called Alien Swarm on Steam as well, which I'm currently looking at. It's a cracking twin stick. That was from one of my patrons. Strong chase, thank you bro. Can you still play Alien Breed 1, the original, now on an emulation? I couldn't really find a decent sort of purchase of it or have it running in some sort of browser, but if you're into sort of retro systems, then you're best off running it from one of them. This is what modern twin stick shooters look like now. My god, they've got ray tracing. There's not an ounce of HR Giga plagiarism on site. They're damn good. I've done a few lists, a modern one as well, so the Ascent is probably at the top or near the top of a couple of them.
Xeno Crisis.
However, if you do want some amazing plagiaristic aliens, twin stick, bullet hell bliss, then Xenocrisis is on Game Pass, has been reviewed by my good self. Hop on over to links.
Rescue the humans.
I have, of course, been Couch Cooper, and this is the 8th classic couch co-op video. I'll put the playlist in the link. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you, damn it!